Dear Airsoft enthusiasts, my name is Laurențiu Zanfirescu. I am the acting chair of Western Australia Airsoft Club. In today's video, we bring you an interview with two of the most prominent airsoft lobbying personalities in the European Union. The purpose of the interview is education and awareness raising regarding the sport of airsoft. Keep tuned. So during all these lobbying years for the sport of airsoft, what have been some of the challenges you've encountered so far? And I'll start with you, Joachim, if you're smirking.
Yeah, well, I can write a book just on that subject.
And I believe you are actually writing a book on that subject.
But a summary, misinformed politicians, misinformed decision makers, misinformed police, and bureaucracy. Right. And by saying misinformed, it's not a negative thing. It's very normal because our sport is 50 years behind all the other sports in the world. We're just becoming, like I said a decade ago, organized, and the sport is growing so fast. So there's a lot of misinformation out there. And that's been generally the challenges that I've been seeing through, since 2004.
Yeah. Okay. What about yourself, Matt? What have been some of these challenges in your lobbying efforts?
I'd say that the main challenges have been lack of willingness from MPs, again, like Joachim was saying, because they've been uninformed. They've kind of made a snap decision based on our visuals, and it's difficult to get them on board to support us sometimes. Same with the media. It's difficult to get because we're quite small fry, it's difficult to get our voice heard equally in the print media and on TV. Denial's been a big issue, where people are sort of so happy with the position of airsoft, it's been around for so long, that they can't really believe that the law's changing and they need to push back. So that's been an issue. Certainly for the industry, as some segments of it have misunderstood the kind of the tentative position of airsoft. Yeah. And apathy from players can certainly be an issue. Again, they sort of think, okay, everything's fine. I go to my local site and I play. But in reality, there's a whole mechanism going on behind them to ensure that they can keep playing, and they need to keep being involved with it.
Mm. Okay, look, I'll ask each of you now about the regulatory frameworks in the UK and the Netherlands, and I'll ask each of you to talk a bit about the positives and the negatives. So, Matt, I know recently the legislation in the UK regarding airsoft has changed. Can you please give us an overview and some of the positives and the negatives associated with it?
So in the UK, we've had the Policing and Crime Bill Policing and Crime Act has been instated, and that has affected the power limits for airsoft in the UK. It worked out very well for us. Our lobbying efforts were very successful because it was going to result in a reduction in power for all UK players. But we convinced the government to essentially settle an exception for airsoft at the same, slightly above the playing limits that we actually use. So it's been really good for all segments of airsoft in that there's been a change in the law that's affected us, but it's not actually changed the way we operate. That's really great. Positives, it's got more airsoft recognition in law. There's more security for airsoft. We know exactly what the power limits are, whereas they were quite vague before. The airgun licensing law in Scotland, that's also come in recently, and the clarifications of power limits mean that airsoft is definitely not in the license scheme for airguns. And as I say, we got the limits to meet what we use anyway. So, yeah, things worked out well.
Okay, what about the coloration requirements for enthusiasts that just want the replica, but they don't want it for playing the sport. Can you tell us a bit about the system where you need a number of games to be put on the UCARA database and so forth?
Yeah, so Airsoft skirmishing is specifically legislated for in that you need to become a club member. You need to play 3 games with them. At that point, they assess you, give you club membership, and at that point, you get entered onto the UCARA database, and you get club membership, which you can use to present as evidence to stores to buy an airsoft. Or airsoft replica, sorry. So that's the system works really well. It's quite simple. It's no real hassle. You get to go to an airsoft game and try out different replicas before you buy. It's a good system. It works for us.
Yeah. Okay, Joachim, can you please give us a similar outline of the legislation in the Netherlands and some of the positives and the negatives?
Legislation in the Netherlands is that you have to be at least 18 years old to play the sport of airsoft. You have to be a registered member with the Dutch Airsoft Association. And you have to be able to show a letter of good conduct, where the Department of Justice and Security does a background check. And of course, the Dutch Airsoft Association also, has to make sure that you're a law-abiding citizen. And there are many others. We have certain power limits. Some airsoft devices are not possible, like certain grenades. But for the rest, HBA or HPA, CO2, electric, everything is possible because we have the exemption on the Firearms Act, because airsoft devices are not considered a firearm. Yeah. So
they're exempt. Any restrictions appearance-wise, or no? It can replicate. It can look like a pony or a fully automatic machine gun if it wants to.
Yes. Yeah. Absolutely. We also don't have the coloring. The mandatory coloring, and it's not only in this country. In the UK, of course, the vast majority of countries don't use the mandatory coloring.
So in the case of Netherlands, the politicians and the police decided that actually having some mandatory coloration would be more detrimental than some positives that it would bring.
Yes, absolutely. And, for example, your question of a reasonable regulatory regime is, as far as I'm concerned, each country and regions have different laws. So there's no one standard. There are parts in the world where you can buy an airsoft device in the supermarket, and in other parts there are age restrictions or mandatory memberships. My opinion is that governments should start by officially recognizing Airsoft Sport Association, and if there's no legislation in place, like in Australia, create them together with a healthy mindset towards our sport, but also in balance with the laws in that country and the needs of its citizens. So besides the governmental recognized associations, a balance, what I see on regulatory level is that, all ages can play our sport. Players are able to repair their devices at home and also practice at home, train at home for competitions, and the no mandatory coloring on airsoft devices.
Right, okay, so Matt, Joachim touched a bit on what would represent a reasonable regulatory regime for airsoft that would balance both player needs and the concerns of the public and the politicians. Would you have anything to add to that?
Yeah, I think that elements that I would find would be essential to licensing or regulatory regime for airsoft. Really, that restricts the ownership of airsoft is important. I think that that really is a colossal reduction in the potential for abuse. It keeps airsoft long-term viable as well, because it keeps the public perception of airsoft up. I would vet the clubs as well, which are admitting members, just like real gun clubs. Keep rentals available, so you don't always have to purchase your own replica. There's going to be something on site for pickup players. That's very important. And government and police administration is something you want to avoid. There's no reason for the government to get involved. The police are certainly busy enough as it is. So keeping that in-house with the Airsoft itself to administer the system, I think that's an important factor too.